We all know that governments keep secrets from their citizens. In an ideal world, we like to think that all of these lies are necessary to protect national security or avoid a panic. In most democracies, we can hope that the government will eventually declassify these secrets. The US government has plenty of secrets of its own, and thankfully, it has a relatively good record of declassifying material when it no longer poses a risk to security. Buried in these declassified files, however, are gruesome, terrifying, and outright disturbing revelations of what the most powerful nation on Earth has gotten up to over the years. Today, on A Day in History, we're looking at some of the worst and weirdest secrets revealed by declassified documents. If you're interested in topics like this, check out our other videos looking at the secrets of the CIA or the actions of other governments like Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany. You can also like this video and subscribe to keep up with similar videos in the future. Before we talk about some secrets, we need to talk about something that's definitely not a secret. Our video sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. Raid is a global phenomenon mobile RPG where you collect champions to engage in awesome PvE and PvP battles. Raid has a wealth of exciting content like dungeons, raids, and a campaign, all with console-quality graphics available on mobile. There's tons of reasons to play Raid, but let us spell out our favorites for you. Regular updates are constantly adding new champions, game modes, and other content to the game, so there's always more to see. Arena is one of our favorite areas of the game, where you engage in intense PvP combat, and they just announced a brand new live arena mode where you can fight other players in real time. With an immense roster of over 300 champions, all with awesome designs and unique kits to tackle different areas of the game, you'll have plenty of interesting ways to play. And the best part, download it completely for free. Raid is currently celebrating its 4-year anniversary with gifts, offers, promo codes, events, and a brand new fusion event to get your hands on anniversary-themed legendary champion. If you haven't tried Raid yet, now's the time to start. Follow the link in the description or scan the QR code to begin your Raid journey with a ton of extra bonuses, like the epic champion Kellen the Shrike and a ton of other goodies. All new and existing players can also log into the game and use the promo code 4YearsRaid to get a birthday present of 4 legendary skill tomes along with a bunch of other gifts. Come and find me under the name A Day in History, and if you're fast enough, you can join my clan. So just hit my link in the description and I'll see you on the battlefield. The US government has developed some of the most advanced and dangerous technologies in the world. Among these, few are more infamous than the atomic bomb. It's no surprise then that the US invested a great deal of effort into researching the effects of radiation. Many of these experiments were ethical and productive, but some were not, and perhaps the worst was Project Sunshine. Starting in 1953, the US wanted to know whether ongoing atomic tests were affecting the general population. The Atomic Energy Commission debated over how they could investigate such a sensitive subject, and eventually settled on a grim solution. They would secretly steal bodies, mostly those of babies and children, and conduct tests on them. Members of the project were told to secretly work, quote, through personal contacts with foreign doctors, to slowly assemble samples. It would arouse less suspicion to spread out the body snatching across the world, rather than gather them all in one place. Documents record the AEC commissioner at the time claiming, if anybody knows how to do a good job of body snatching, they will really be serving their country. From Britain to Australia, US agents retrieved parts or whole bodies of young children to measure the amount of strontium-90 being absorbed into their bones. Secrecy meant that they didn't ask the parents first. Grieving parents would simply find that their child's body had mysteriously gone missing, or were fed a lie for why the body couldn't be returned to them. In one famous case reported in Britain, a mother was prevented from personally preparing her son's body for the funeral because doctors had to hide the fact that they'd removed his legs and sent them away for Project Sunshine. Scientists used the samples in experiments and produced several studies, none of which revealed the true origins of their material. The AEC maintained that the advancements in medical knowledge were worth the ethical violations. All in all, 1,500 bodies were stolen or cut up to fuel Project Sunshine's experiments. While the experiments themselves were known for decades, it was only much later that the theft of human bodies became known. In 1995, President Clinton set up a committee to investigate radiation experiments, of which Project Sunshine proved to be the most controversial. Their report concluded that while the AEC had given plenty of thought to the legality of body snatching, quote, there is no evidence that it sought to consider any independent ethical requirements for disclosure to the families of the subjects or the subjects themselves. Sunshine was just one unethical medical experiment undertaken by the US government. Perhaps the most dubious of all was the infamous Tuskegee Experiment. This experiment ran for 40 years, between 1932 and 1972. The U.S. Public Health Service, PHS, and the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, partnered with Tuskegee University to observe the effects of syphilis on 600 poor black sharecroppers from rural Alabama. Around 400 of the subjects tested positive for the disease, with the other 200 as a control group. The black farmers were seen as a powerless group who were unlikely to have the education or resources to cause problems, and they were unlikely to move away, so they made for a good long-term prospect for study. The victims were told they were participating in a simple medical study and were never told that they had syphilis. If the illness was impossible to hide, the victims were told that they had bad blood, a bogus term used to hide real medical issues. Documents revealed that there was no concern over the racial dynamics of picking an entirely black population to experiment on. Syphilis can be a dangerous disease with a range of life-changing or fatal complications. However, it was already highly treatable with penicillin by the early mid-20th century. The researchers could have cured the participants at any point, but refused to. Not only that, they told participants not to seek any other medical treatment, as it could affect the study. By 1948, 140 of the patients had died, many of them from complications of syphilis. Nevertheless, the experiments continued. Participants were invited to annual checkups for decades, where researchers analyzed the progress of the disease while pretending to be doing normal medical tests. The study continued, and every year more participants would die from the disease. In 1958, the researchers had the audacity to give surviving participants a certificate, quote, in grateful recognition of 25 years of service in the Tuskegee Medical Research Study. By 1968, 35 years after the start of the experiment, just 89 participants were still alive. A review of the experiment that year acknowledged its unethical nature, but insisted that its data was too valuable. At least 130 participants had died from syphilis or related complications by then, but the real number was certainly higher, since not every participant's body was examined. Most of the survivors had health problems like high blood pressure that were linked to the untreated syphilis. Despite the deception and death, the project continued until summer 1972, when a whistleblower called Peter Buxton leaked the experiment to the Associated Press. The story prompted huge public backlash, especially from the African American community. The experiment officially ended in November 1972, and various government agencies spent years reviewing the documents. New regulations and oversight committees were established to ensure nothing like it ever happened again. but many felt it was too little, too late. Almost 90% of the victims were already dead. The Tuskegee Experiment was a startling display of racial discrimination and government deception, which still casts a dark shadow. To this day, it's a major reason for the distrust of government and medical science among African Americans. In recent years, the memory of Tuskegee was cited as a reason for low vaccine uptake among Black Americans during the COVID-19 pandemic. Tuskegee is far from the only government secret whose effects are still being felt today. Questions have long been raised over the events leading to the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, and whether the government lied about its claims that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction. Throughout 2002 and 2003, the US and UK claimed to have uncovered mounting evidence of Iraq's secret nuclear weapons program. The smoking gun in these allegations were a set of documents, supposedly showing that Iraq had been secretly attempting to buy massive amounts of uranium from Niger. Niger was one of the world's biggest supplies of uranium, and both the US and UK governments pointed to this as concrete proof of Iraq's sinister intentions. However, all was not as it seemed. On March 7th, officials from the International Atomic Energy Agency reviewed the documents and quickly concluded that they were false. There were many signs that the documents were forged, ranging from sloppy formatting to the most basic facts being wrong. For example, the amount of uranium that Iraq was supposedly asking for was an unreasonably high amount for Niger to move in the first place, let alone to move secretly. Most egregious of all, the documents named some high-level Nigerian officials who were not actually in those positions when the documents were supposed to have been made. The forgeries were so blatant that one IAEA official claimed that they could be spotted by someone using Google on the internet. How did the most advanced intelligence agencies in the world get deceived by such sloppy fakes? The real question might be, were they ever deceived at all? Other documents show that the US was working closely with the UK on a global propaganda campaign to drum up hostility to Saddam's regime. Granted, that might not have been hard to do. Saddam was an awful dictator, but it was clear that the US and UK were paving the way for war long before the Niger documents arrived. Many believe that the documents were forged by the US to act as the last push to justify an invasion. Even though the documents were debunked, the headlines about the allegations were much louder and more numerous than the truth. Less than 2 weeks after the documents were exposed, the US-led coalition invaded Iraq, beginning a war that would drag on for years and cost tens of thousands of lives. Worse still, US forces never found the stockpiles of WMDs and weapon construction facilities that they claimed would be there. Later, the man in charge of leading the US teams set up to investigate WMDs admitted to Congress that we were almost all wrong. While chemical weapons that violated UN regulations were indeed found, it is undeniable that most of the US government's claims proved to be false. As these leaked documents show, we have to ask if the government already knew that. Thankfully, not every government secret is quite so grim. Over the years, declassified documents have revealed that the US government has had complicated relationships with many famous figures. For example, throughout the 1960s, the US paid $180,000 a year to the Dalai Lama. Why? The Dalai Lama was seen as a useful asset to resist Chinese expansion in Tibet. The US also funded the Tibetan resistance as a way to stop the spread of communism in Asia. But the Dalai Lama was not alone in helping the US government. Maybe the strangest of all of these was Julia Child, the beloved chef who captured American hearts for decades with her recipe books and cooking shows. In 2008, declassified documents revealed that Child had begun her cooking career working for the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, during the Second World War. Her enemy? Sharks. The OSS wanted a way to stop sharks interfering with underwater explosives. Child ended up creating a shark repellent that successfully protected the explosives, and it's still in use today. This was actually the first time Child dabbled in cooking. Of all the secrets buried in the government files, the true origins of America's first celebrity chef is certainly one of the weirder ones. Of course, not every celebrity was on good terms with the US government. These days, it's well known that the FBI spied on Martin Luther King and attempted to blackmail him with knowledge of his affairs, even suggesting that he should kill himself. Another target of US surveillance was John Lennon, frontman of the Beatles. Lennon was famously active in politics, with strong ties to various anti-war and communist groups. In 1971, Nixon asked the FBI to monitor Lennon, which they did for at least 11 months. They kept records of his meetings with political groups and details of his personal life, but by 1972, they decided that there was nothing worth monitoring. However, the government wouldn't let it be and tried unsuccessfully to deport him in 1973. The truth about the surveillance first emerged in 1981, when an investigative journalist, John Wiener, was granted access to some documents following Lennon's assassination. However, it would take until 2006 for every document to be released, following lengthy court battles and debates about national security. When revelations of the FBI's monitoring came to light, many people couldn't imagine how the government could get away with spying on a popular public figure. As it turns out, they hadn't even begun to scratch the surface. In 2013, Edward Snowden exposed one of the largest government conspiracies of all. The US government had been spying on civilians, organizations, and governments all over the world for decades. Snowden had been an employee of the National Security Agency, NSA, where he became alarmed at the NSA's surveillance program. After his concerns were ignored by NSA officials, Snowden fled to Hong Kong and leaked thousands of classified documents to the press, igniting a global firestorm over surveillance by the US government and its allies. Snowden's leaks showed that NSA, CIA, and other government agencies had been spying on electronic communications around the world. Phone records, text messages, emails, video calls, locational metadata, and other forms of electronic data were being intercepted and recorded for supposed counter-terrorism purposes. Immediately, citizens, journalists, civil rights groups, and foreign governments criticized the US and its allies for huge breaches of privacy. The extent of the surveillance was incredible. Documents showed extensive collaboration between the NSA and major tech companies like Google, Facebook, and Microsoft to steal users' data. For example, the NSA had access to the phone records of over 120 million Verizon users. Meanwhile, documents showed that Microsoft had worked closely with the NSA to arrange backdoors into their data servers that gave access to hundreds of millions of users, even though that directly contradicted Microsoft's public commitments to user privacy. By late 2012, the NSA had the means to intercept an estimated 75% of all US internet traffic. But US citizens weren't the only targets. The documents showed how the US was spying on foreign citizens, often in collaboration with their governments. In December 2012, leaked documents showed that the NSA was gathering data on 15 million phone calls a day within Europe, and they had hacked into the private networks of the European Union. It was even revealed that leading politicians like German Chancellor Angela Merkel had their communications tapped. Elsewhere, the NSA spied on Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff and her allies, prompting her to cancel a planned trip to the US in protest. US agencies even hacked into the UN's private video conferencing networks. It seemed that no one was safe. The reaction from the US government was a mix of denial, downplaying, and demonization. President Obama insisted that there was no spying being conducted on Americans, but those claims rang hollow as more documents piled up and evidence became irrefutable. Some officials attempted to blame Russia, arguing that the wound to the US's international reputation was exactly the sort of thing Putin would want. These claims were fueled when Snowden sought asylum in Russia in 2014 and was later granted citizenship. However, there is no evidence of Snowden having contact with Russia before the leaks, nor is there any evidence that the hundreds of journalists who actually leaked the documents publicly were Russian agents, and none of that disputes the fact that the claims in those documents were true. The US government charged Snowden under the Espionage Act and committed to clamping down harder on whistleblowers and leakers. The embarrassment caused by the Snowden scandal and then the WikiLeaks scandal soon after might be the reason for the Obama administration's noticeably harsh treatment of journalists. According to the ACLU, the majority of jail time handed out by the US government to journalists under the Espionage Act was done by the Obama administration, dwarfing the prosecutions from other famously anti-journalist administrations, like those of FDR, Nixon, or even Donald Trump combined. The worst part about the NSA spying scandal was that nothing was done about it. Once public shock and outrage died down, nothing changed. We all seem to have accepted that the US government, or any government, is constantly collecting data on us every minute of our increasingly digital lives. If anything, they've become more blatant about it. Governments and technology companies are more closely linked than ever, as they work to monitor, control, and censor their citizens, and there's no sign that will change anytime soon. We've only caught a glimpse of the secrets hidden in the files of the US government. We can only wonder what else will be revealed in time and what will never be revealed at all. There's also many other governments around the world who don't declassify their secrets, leaving us to question what other bizarre or disturbing things have gone on under our noses. Only time will tell. Unlike the US government, we don't keep secrets from you here at A Day in History. In fact, we'd love to share more of them with you in future videos. Make sure to subscribe to get notified of future uploads, and like this video if you enjoyed delving into the secret archives.